So let us pray together. God of justice and compassion, you open your hands and satisfy every living creature. Open our hearts to those who worry about feeding their families. Help us to open our minds and our hands to feed them. Amen. Wait a little bit. All right. So last week we had some good opening discussion about food security and hunger, and in Wisconsin, we didn't get we got kind of caught up in some things, lots of good information. But I want to make sure that you review the handout number 4 that you received last week, and it's titled handout number 4: Hunger's Impact on Children and Others. And just as this is a good one to keep in the front of your folder, kind of to remind yourselves of some things of just how when I think of hunger, and there were some times in my life that I definitely knew that my parents made sacrifices so that we would have food. We never went without food, and I didn't realize just how much we went without other things so that we would always have food to eat. Sometimes we think of hunger as just that pain in our stomach. We don't really understand exactly what it can do long term to us. So this lists some of the effects that children and other adults experience when they are food insecure, when they go chronically living in situations in which they do not have adequate food. And as we'll learn some more in the coming weeks, not even that, but adequate nutrition. And how important that is for all of us, for them to be remind ourselves of what these impacts of hunger can be. Like last week, we talked a little bit about how poor education, lack of education was related to food insecurity. People who had lower levels of education or weren't able to complete education. But it can be a chronic spirally thing there, that when you're hungry, especially for children, when you're food insecure, you're more likely to have a very difficult time accessing the educational system, no matter what kind of educational system that you're in, public or private. You'll have more absences. You're not able to focus, learn. Your test scores are lower, and it just can then just continue that system, those effects long term. So please take time to read that, think about that, and also just why it is so very important what we're doing as a church and taking a serious look at food security and making a serious effort to increase the level of food security in our community and throughout the world. So that's an important one that we didn't get to talk about last week at all, but I just want to let you see that and review that for the weeks to come. We didn't get a chance to look at some of the Bible study components last week either, so we're going to start out with that this week. We're going to take a good look at that. But last week I asked you guys to read a couple of verses from the Gospel of Luke, in which we hear Mary's. This is Mary's response to her time, of encountering her cousin Elizabeth when both Mary and Elizabeth were pregnant, and Mary, in her response, in her what we liturgically call the Magnificat in Luke 1, Mary says that God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. And I asked you guys if you took some time to read that and to think about that. When you read something like that, how does it make you feel? Jay?
I got confused. Were they talking physical food or spiritual food? I read this
okay.
3 times, 46 from 48 to 56, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I wasn't sure whether or not it says Mary's song in my Bible.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether or not it was spiritual food she was talking about or physical.
Well, I'll probably go ahead and say both. Okay. But because it's very clear in the New Testament, in the Gospels, that when Jesus says, feed the hungry, he literally means to feed them. But then he goes ahead and talks about bread of life that you can't, that's him and you got to chew it and eat it unless you do. So he does talk about both spiritual and physical food. So
it says he has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. So he's also Jesus often refers to the wealthy, the people with money.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, being sent away, but so in that line, she's definitely talking about money, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Why would you send someone rich in the spirit away?
Right. When we say poor in things and rich in spirit, is another line from the gospel lessons. It does seem that there is often in the Bible, and we'll hear a little bit more about that in the passages that we're going to read and think about today, that there does seem to be a dichotomy, a tension between those who have and those who don't in the Bible. And God most certainly seems to say those who are rich in things are most often portrayed in a way of you're going to be pushed away. You're going to be there's something negative about that status as compared to those who are hungry and poor. You filled the poor, you filled the hungry with good things. You send the rich away empty. How does that dichotomy between hungry and poor and rich make you guys feel?
Well, does it simply mean that God prioritizes those who are in need physically? I don't know if it means when you say sent away, it's like, you're not, I'm maybe interpreting it as, you're not my priority. I'm focused on these people who are in need, physically
and spiritually. Yeah.
So not necessarily that it's bad to have.
Okay, right. I would agree with that. Yeah.
But that you're not where my focus is.
Okay. That's a good. I like that because being rich in and of itself is not bad. Is what Jesus is communicating, but it's the things that we tend to associate. The things that tend to go along with it. So I like, Dave, how you worded that. That's good. I'm gonna capitalize on that. But how still would it be? Do you to feel like God to tell you you're not my priority? I'm not really paying attention to you right now.
Well, I think it might go unnoticed by the well-to-do, because the well-to-do tend to think that they're well-to-do because of their own doing, and they don't need God.
Okay. Okay. So it's unnoticed. Water off a duck's back to the wealthy. They didn't realize that they were ignored or deprioritized towards by God. Is that kind of what, yeah?
I was just
Sorry,
to add on,
No,
Judy's,
no,
I was thinking like the prodigal son, when the prodigal son, then all of a sudden there's the big feast and he's the one that needed the attention and got it. And then could the rich kind of be like that brother that got, they
Yeah.
could get upset or they could just walk away.
Mm-hmm. Why, yeah,
On
he
that,
doesn't
yeah.
deserve that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find it very unsettling, as many times as that's mentioned in the Bible. They talk about going through the eye of a needle, and, and I'm thinking, wow, what does one have to give up in order to be worthy? Do I have to give up everything? It just, every time that's read, I
There's
read that in the Bible, it just gives me the creeps kind of.
Okay, yeah. Because, I bring this up because it's an important distinction. It's one of some of what we heard and talked about last week is that hunger and food insecurity disproportionately affects those who are on the lower levels of income and that it affects them, far more significantly. When Mary sends out an email this week, I'm going to have her. There's going to be a link to a website that will allow you just to kind of see how much poverty. If you go to this website, there's some interactive things you can go to it just to kind of see how pervasive poverty and hunger go through a person's life and how much it if you're on a lower end of income, of how significantly that impacts the entirety of your life. It's a great way of just familiarizing yourselves with what some of the things that people in these situations deal with. But with something that we have to acknowledge for ourselves here in this room is I don't care what you think your income is, what your income level is. The fact that all of you came here in a manner that involved an automobile means that you are within the richest top single digits of the human population. So each and every one of us in this room on a global scale fall unequivocally in the category of rich.
And why do we have that, but then others don't? I mean, I was born into a middle-class family. Why do I have that? And people in India are scratching for food.
You won the birth lottery.
I know.
There's a smaller number of us in this room that won that even won the birth lottery even more by being born a male.
A white man.
A white male in America. So while there is still poverty and in food insecurity in America, and there is huge discrepancies between wealth and income, and because I know every single person in this room has worked very hard and continues to work very hard for their living and the resources that they have. And that's not what we're, as Deb kind of points out, each of us in this room have worked hard, but each of us in this room have benefited from things that we've not worked for by the just mere fact of where and when we were born. And to whom we were born to, because we are all white in this room, we are all Caucasian. We saw last week if you're non-white, well, your chances of being food insecure skyrocket. So there's a lot of things that go on that affect this issue that isn't just based upon an individual's performance at a job or at education. There's a lot of factors that go on here that are beyond an individual's control. Okay, and that's something for us to think about as we examine this and we look for causes. But it's also something to keep in mind when we read scriptures like Mary's song, Mary's Magnificat there, and then we hear God say, the hungry I fill with good things, and the rich I send away empty. Or it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. And it's also something to keep in mind when we read a couple of passages here that I want us to look at more closely today. And I'm going to pick on Ted. He has his Bible open. Ted, would you find Isaiah? Book of Isaiah, chapter 5.
Yep.
Verses 8 through 9. Read Isaiah 5, 8 through 9.
You who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is room for no one but you, you are left to live alone in the midst of the land. The Lord hosts has sworn in my hearing. Surely many houses shall be desolate, large and beautiful houses without inhabitant.
I think you are reading the wrong.
Isaiah 5,
Isaiah 5,
8 and 9.
verses 8 and 9. Oh, I was looking at the wrong one. Sorry.
Mine
Go
was
right there.
what I had.
Yep.
Should I read that again?
Mm-hmm.
You who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is room for no one but you. You are left to live alone in the midst of the land. The Lord of hosts has sworn in my hearing. Surely many houses shall be desolate, large and beautiful houses without inhabitant.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's going on there.
I think they're talking about when families, like arranged marriages and things, to build their estates into larger estates. Is that what I was getting at?
Mm-hmm.
And so that they're building the wealth of these families by.
Puts a different light.
Yep. It's talking about the
Okay.
consolidation of resources into a single, a few singular places.
Can I read a different translation?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
What sorrow for you who buy up house after house and field after field, until everyone is evicted and you live alone in the land. But I have heard the Lord of heaven's armies swear a solemn oath. Many houses will stand deserted, even beautiful mansions will be empty.
Mm-hmm.
That's easier to understand what's going on, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Light bulb went on.
Yeah.
Well, and if you peek up one verse before too, it's God was expecting justice and instead there was bloodshed and he's hearing all these cries of distress of people needing help and there's no help.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of puts it into why you
Mhm.
brought it up. And they're just buying houses instead of helping people.
Well, I was thinking, it's happening right here,
Right.
right here. People are buying houses and not living in them. And or using them as Airbnbs, and it raises the rent prices. And workers can't find a place a reasonable place to rent.
Yeah. Why would you
Or
rent
buy.
a house to somebody for $1,000 a month when you can make $1,000 a week?
A week, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I understand they're buying them up to be vacation and people are kicked out that have lived there for years, but they've
It's happening
rented
all
and they
over,
no
yeah.
longer had control.
Yeah.
And worse than that, not just people buying real estate in that fashion. Large companies are buying up all sorts of things.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Large amounts.
Well, it goes for farmland and things.
Yeah.
farmland too,
Yeah, right.
all industrial farming.
Okay. So it seems like this passage describes something that happened even though the economic structure of ancient Israel and Western, and American economic structure and real estate differ greatly, but it's something that we immediately recognize of how wealth is used to gather up, and it becomes more and more resources are available and consolidated into the hands of a few. And it doesn't, and immediately we start to say, this doesn't sound fair, right? This doesn't sound, or maybe not, if we don't want to say fair, this doesn't necessarily sound good, right? And if God comes right on and says it, oh, wow, all these empty houses, even the big, huge empty ones, are going to be empty eventually if you keep doing this. There's definitely God's showing them a picture. This isn't going to end well, even for those who are amassing this, right? Then let's take a look. I'll read this out for us, but Isaiah 10, we're going to stay in Isaiah 1 through 4. You who make inquisious decree. I'm not even sure what that word
Mine
is.
says unjust.
Okay. I'm going to go with that.
Unjust, yeah.
Unjust decrees, who write oppressive statutes, to turn aside the needy from justice and to rob the poor of my people of their right, that widows may be your spoil, that you may make the orphans your prey. What will you do on the day of punishment, in the calamity that will come from afar? To whom will you flee for help, and where will you leave your wealth? So as not to crouch among the prisoners, or fall among the slain. For all this his anger has not turned away, his hand is stretched out still. So as we hear this passage, I want to put up here, this is early in Isaiah. Isaiah is, one, making a prophecy why the southern kingdom of Judah is going to get destroyed by the Babylonians. Okay, so God is upset. Therefore, God is removing his hand of protection from the Israelite people, the southern kingdom of Judah. We can go more into that dynamic at a different time, and is going to allow their destruction. This is what Isaiah is saying. This is coming. So when he speaks of on the day of punishment, in the calamity that will come from far away, to whom will you flee for help, and where will you leave your wealth? He's talking about the Babylonian invasion and the exile of and the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, and the exiling of people out of Israel. And Babylon did not care if you were a rich person in Israel or a poor person in Israel. Okay, so you can picture Isaiah 5. All those people who bought up all the houses and fields, they're not going to be yours, and they're going to stand empty. That's literally there is a fulfillment of that prophecy in the Babylonian exile of the people of Israel out of Judea. But what seems to be making God upset? To allow this or to ordain this or to facilitate this calamity?
Drafting
Greed.
legislation to deprive the poor.
Oppressive statutes.
Mm-hmm.
Turn aside the
Injustice.
needy from justice.
Mm-hmm. Unjust decrees, oppressive laws that turn the needy away from justice. When we say justice here, what do you think this means?
Treated equally.
Right. It's about being treated
Fair.
equally or fairly. It's not about crime and punishment, like our justice system. It's about making sure that things are balanced and things are, that people are treated the way that they should be being treated. So you create statutes, laws to keep the needy from what they need and what should be theirs. You rob the poor of their right. We're not exactly sure what rights they're robbing them of, but the idea, we could think of this as, what are they being taken from? Previous chapter, their homes, their land, their things.
Eminent domain.
Eminent domain, the right to.
Glean the fields.
Lots of things of access to food, the things to make them right. You spoil, the widows may be your spoil, that you may make orphans your prey. Easy targets. In America, when we think about poverty and food security, there is a government organization that oversees all food industries. The United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, right?
Yeah.
Do you know that they also have the right, their secondary function, their second primary function, the USDA, is to advocate for the American consumer? Which side of the equation do you think actually gets that they spend most of their time on?
The farmer.
First one.
Or food safety, I mean,
Right.
with
Food
so
safety,
much with
yeah, food safety,
So the
but
consumer, protecting this,
the consumer, you think of food safety, they're out there inspecting, they set the things like the use by dates, but it's a government agency, so it's run by politicians and lawmakers, right? Of what they enforce. Do you know that they set nutrition guidelines and standards? It's the USDA that funds food programs like food pantries, SNAP, WIC, free and reduced lunches at schools, and set what foods those benefits can be used for. Now, who do you think has the louder voice to the USDA about those things? The consumer, the American citizen, or the food industries that the USDA regulates?
The industry.
Food
industry.
It's one of the reasons that the Congress has such difficulty passing their agriculture, the Farm Bill,
Mhm.
because you've got elements in Congress that are all about subsidies and things for the producers, and elements in Congress that are all about making sure that there's adequate nutrition programs for low-income people.
Mhm.
And
Just like
they are
pharmaceuticals.
completely at odds with each other generally. So I think this is the year that they're supposed to get that passed, and I don't think they have yet.
Oh, no,
It's every 10 years
they
that it's
never
renewed,
do
or every
really
5
well.
years, I can't remember.
I think
Yeah,
it's
it's
every
not
Yeah.
gonna happen.
So, again, this is something that happens. Why is it that rules, regulations, laws tend to favor the industry with the money? I mean, if you look at, and you can find these things online, that website that we'll show that, and I'll share a couple others, that of what the nutritional standard of a school free hot lunch is. It's set by the USDA. You know who wrote that nutritional standard? The food company that could sell the food.
Mhm.
You asked why that is? Because they contribute to the campaign of the politician who wants to get reelected.
So what does that sound like?
Got it.
Legislation
Corruption.
to oppress the poor.
Well, I think there's a local example even there too. The cranberry growers.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time when cranberry juice was considered a fruit.
Yeah.
Deb, you probably know this from school. And once they considered, because of all the sweeteners and stuff in cranberry juice, withdrew that as a fruit element to a kid's lunch program, it the cranberry growers had a hard time selling all their cranberry juice. They could sell all their craisins, but they couldn't sell all their cranberry juice. So it was locally even, that was a big deal, I think. I may have that wrong, but that's sort of the generally correct, I think.
Yeah. It is an exceedingly complicated issue, but we can just, in what we're looking at here, Food for Food Security, we can see how those with power and wealth create systems that benefit them or at the expense of those who do not have wealth and power and influence. And again, much like what we were trying to, does it make you feel a little uncomfortable?
It makes me angry because I feel helpless, even though I vote for who I think will represent me. It doesn't always happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There seems to be a clear in the scripture that we hear, and you can find multiple other examples consistently and through all elements of the Bible, of the Old Testament, New Testament, and all formed in the Gospels and the letter, of this tension that is lifted up, that God tends to say, this is not what I want. Okay? If you have wealth, power, and resources, that's fine. But what do you do with them? We had some conversation last week about the income inequality in Wisconsin. I'm still not, and it should be in your handout packet here, I'm still not going to try to explain this because I don't fully understand it, except that the fact of what the authors are saying, or even the researchers and the statisticians are saying, is that it is becoming, there is a greater disparity between those who, the richer are getting richer and the poorer are getting poorer. And yes, Jay.
Question. When we read, just got the reading down here, sounds like God is going to take away power to those who think they have power. Now, when you read this, are we getting set up for the same thing? No, that just hit me when we read this. If we read this, is he giving us to us this Bible study now and say, hey, this is going to happen to you guys sooner or later? Do you think that I'm right, or am I totally off base?
I would not say that there is a prophecy of another Babylonian exile. But, it would probably, as a sci-fi nerd, it would probably be by an alien species saying, you guys are idiots, and we're going to take you over here. You can't be trusted to take care of yourselves. But, yes, no.
History repeats itself in a way like we fit that in with the houses.
Economic systems cannot sustain. Economists are starting to say the way the American economy is functioning is not sustainable. It will not continue the way that it is going, or not even just the American economy. Our global economy is in trouble. You can't work that way. So I'm not saying yes or no, but I'm saying that it's pretty clear. I mean, it wasn't just economic situations in which the people were coming, that Babylon was coming. Babylon was coming. It was becoming a great power in the world. It was going to take over what it was going to take over too. But it is important to catch these parallels and say that this isn't okay. What's happening now has happened before, and it didn't go well. Now that isn't the same cause. Part of what I'm saying is the economic injustice that was going on inside of Israel guess what? When it came back after, when Judea was reestablished after the fall of Babylon, they still had significant economic injustice. So did Rome. But those things will continue to happen throughout that period of time. But what I really want us to hear is God's thought about it, especially for those of us in a global perspective who would fall into the side of the wealthy, who would fall in the side of the powerful. What kind of responsibility do you think God is saying we bear as being the rich?
Oh, I think when we use the term rich, we're using a big giant ball.
Right.
I think there's a distinction between well-to-do, even rich, versus rich who have power. There's a lot of rich people, or well-to-do people, this church is probably full of them, who don't have power. They don't have political power. They don't have the connections to make like the FDA decisions or what Fauci did during COVID. I think just using the term rich is a little misleading. I think there's rich, there's well-to-do, then there's power brokers. I mean, they're extraordinarily wealthy. And I'm not going to name names because I don't know these people in the first place. Well, I know their names, but that doesn't mean they're bad, good, or indifferent. So I think the Bible is alluding to those, quote, rich, versus people who have worked hard all their life and been successful. If that's sinful, then a lot of us in this room are sinners, and I don't buy that one.
No, and I would agree with you. There are different levels. But what's important to hear is what doesn't matter. I'm going to still use that term rich. Yes, there are those who are rich, have power, and who have influence. There's a very small number. There are all factors in it. And what I'm saying, in this room, you look at, in all of us in this room, you look at a global scale of all of humanity, we fall into that top level group just because we are white Americans. And we have significant more resources available to us and significant more power. Well, we might not have the most power in the world, we still have significant access to resources and power at our disposal than the majority of all other human beings do not have access to. And I'm not saying that's sinful. That isn't, nor does the Bible say that that is sinful.
Well, makes us look awful bad.
So there's a feeling of what, but I haven't, so if I'm hearing you right, John, it makes you uncomfortable to hear things like that the Bible talk about this, because it's like, I didn't do that. I haven't targeted widows and orphans. So, but what is our responsibility? Why do you think God over and over and over again in Isaiah, Jesus's parables, Proverbs, Jeremiah, everywhere? I mean, it is from page 1 to the very last page. There is always this, and God's saying, this is rich, wealthy, powerful, those with resources. How are you treating? And you have to look at it. So what does you think that God is saying? Deb, you were going to raise your hand.
I was just thinking it's not always just about money, it's about gifts and talents too.
Mm-hmm.
Ways to use our intelligence and our bodies, and there's a whole realm of it, not just the dollar sign.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
where we lack monetarily, we could still help in other ways.
Right, right, yeah, with lots of different resources other than just money, yeah. What else do you think that God is trying to get us to think about? Sue?
Well, I think there's the obligation to recognize the injustice and then to take it personally, like, is there something that I can do about that? Possibly not individually, but collectively.
Mhm.
Because I can be generous in many different ways. And there may be advocacy that's needed, and some of us have the talent to do that too. But to sit back with apathy and do nothing, I think that's a sin.
Okay.
One of the reasons I like this church so much is that we're so involved trying to do for each other. When you think about all the fundraisers, which generate money, but you think about, last summer we had our rummage sale and we have our cookie walk, and I mean, we're movers and shakers. We might just be moving that fast, but I think we're trying. I mean, there's more to do, but we're trying.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. I like exactly how Sue said it. I think this will get to you here, John. I know. I think God is trying to get us to see what is there. I mean, one of the most problematic verses in the Bible for me is when Jesus says, the hungry will always be with you. The poor will always be with you. Like, what? Why is that the case? Well, at least for me, at least in this world, until God says it's over and the new heaven and the new earth come, we are always going to have the poor and the hungry. There is always going to be injustice. There's always going to be an unequal, unfair. Now, do not hear that I think that everybody should get the exact same. Everybody gets everything. No. But as Sue said, it is so easy to look and see in our world, just like in the scripture passages, that there's so many places, so many instances, so many situations in which it is clear that there is not just an unequal distribution, there is an unfair distribution of resources. That is profoundly, affecting people, in a very negative way. Okay, and how do we respond? Is what God seems to be getting us to ask. Jesus will take some of these in some of these concepts that you see here in these passages in Isaiah and expand them in some of his parables. He teaches a parable about a man who has a huge vineyard and he has to go out and hire people to work. And it sounds exactly like what you see. I've never seen it firsthand, but what you see happening with migrant workers and people. This guy goes down to some place in town, finds a bunch of people standing around, and says, "Hey, I'll pay you this to come work in my fields for the day." And the guy goes there multiple times a day, and he ends up paying the people who started first thing in the morning and the person who started at the end the same exact amount. And the people who started in the morning say, "Well, that's not fair." God is trying to get us to stop and understand our systems differently. So even just acknowledging, just as Sue said, I have been blessed with tremendous resources, some of which I can rightfully say I have earned because of my work. Some of which I have not earned, that I receive just by the nature of my birth as Americans. All those other situations, the color of my skin, are those things fair? No. How do I respond to that? How do I see that? Does that, I can't do anything about that? Does that, oh, that's just the way it is? Or is there something else? Even if it is just empathy or a willingness to try or to do something more. When we put it in terms of how many of you would take a look at a kid and see their poor test scores, to have seen a child who has tried to take their life and realize, oh, hey, if I feed them, their test scores will go up. How many of you would do that, would feed that kid? Right? Or the chance is, if I help feed them or feed their family, the chances of them trying to kill themselves again would go down. You would do that, right? Okay.
And then there are those that sit in judgment as to who should get the resources. Like you might be familiar with Caritas in our community. I went to an informational meeting on that. I was just totally turned off because if you sit on the panel, you have to decide who gets something. If they come to you and say, I need money so that I can fix my car and get to work, I have to decide whether or not the community resources go there. And that bothered me, so I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard. So let's keep that discomfort in mind. We should feel uncomfortable about what we are hearing in the Bible and what we see in our world today. So what do we do with that discomfort? That's the kind of the question that's going to move us forward through this and move us through this, our mission focus here, is that there is some things going on. I would, in your handouts for today, take a look at some of those dynamics. Of handout number 7, if you look at, it's handout number 7, it says causes of hunger. And they're just, in this handout, they're just relating income level as a cause for hunger. But we know that can be a whole lots of different things. And they just name 2 reasons that a person might be low income, that they're unemployed, not able to find work, age, disability. If they're already homeless, good luck getting a job. I'll just, as an aside, the number of times that I deal with people who are transit, who aren't necessarily, who don't live under underpasses, but they don't have like a real, they couch surf, they'll live in their cars and park, in campgrounds, but they don't have a permanent address because they don't have a permanent address. They can't get jobs. How do you get a permanent address? How do you afford it's ridiculous. And then you call the one place that they could, and they're packed in our area. Nope, we've got a 4-month waiting list at Nat House. So if they're unemployed, sometimes good luck finding another job because of that. Or insufficiently employed. How many people do we know that have jobs that,
Especially this time of year.
that Hours get cut, pay gets cut. And they end up in this low income area. They have a job, they're working hard, but they're barely getting paid for it, which leads to food and hunger insecurity issues. As we talked about a little bit of what we, here, when you imagine having some income, having a job, and we hear about it in the news all this time, the choices that you have to make. Do you pay for your housing, or do you buy healthy groceries? Do you pray that you don't get sick?
Exactly.
Pray that you have insurance to take your kid for their well child visit, to get those vaccinations that to be able to send them to school, to keep them healthy. If you don't have health insurance, in Wisconsin, you'll probably be on forward health, which is good. Childcare.
I have just a
Mhm.
story.
Yeah.
It's a true story. Is my niece was living in Du Bois, Wyoming,
Mhm.
and she was working as a waitress at a place, and her kid got sick. No one to take care of the kid.
Mhm.
So her employer said, if you don't come in, you're fired.
That's very common.
And that's what
Mhm.
happened.
Very common.
There's no sick days. There's
Yeah.
no, leeway for that.
Mhm.
So she had to stay home with her kid. She's not going to leave a kid home sick. I mean, a little kid sick at home. She got fired. So now she has no money
Mhm.
and a sick kid.
But unemployment is really a governmental disaster. Like the gentleman across the street who owns the Chris filling station, chewing a rag with him, he is just about worn out. He's working 7 days a week, 11 hours a day, because he can't find anyone to work for him. He hires them, they show up for one day, they disappear. Is it that they're unreliable? I'm not so sure that's true. Neither does he feel that way. Our welfare system is a go, no-go system. Once you start earning some money, goodbye welfare. They can't take the change because the income is less than what they're getting from welfare. The welfare is a freer ride because they don't have to put in 8-10 hours a day, and they make more money. So it's very difficult on both sides of the street. For an employer, I mean, how much can a guy pay to someone who basically sits and watches gasoline pumps and, stocks some shelves? I mean, that's not exactly a $30 an hour job. And so we're really at odds with ourselves or our government systems between, he doesn't feel poorly about the people. He's just upset that he hires somebody. They're there one day, they disappear, they never come back, simply because economically they can't afford to work. I mean, that's kind of a
There isn't a
screwed up system.
welfare system that they just hand out checks anymore. That's long gone. That left in the 90s,
It's
80s or 90s. So I don't know what they could be getting other than maybe some food stamps.
Yeah. There are complications on both sides because they're not. Just imagine, from what you're saying, and I believe it because I know I've talked to some people. Imagine receiving so little benefit. You receive very little benefits by not working, but you can get by on those. Then you go and you go and you get a job, and you realize
go backwards.
That would be, I would literally be going backward. Now, is that the person's fault? No.
It's the legislation.
It's an acknowledgement. Man, I mean, there is something broken in this system, and it's huge. This is huge. It's bigger than all of us. If you look through you look through this and you're like, how do you do that? And they pulled out, federally it's 27, for a family of four, it was $27,000
$7,500 for a family of four
To survive?
is the poverty line.
is the poverty line. You're supposed to be able to buy adequate nutrition for a family of four on that amount of money.
And in 2021, the average family of four in the United States had an income of $90,600. Almost four times that.
So those who live in that low income, I mean, we're talking, these are huge and major issues for them. That affect, and they all come, it all comes into it, of how these situations all play into their access to food, and what they can do in their lives. Again, we're running out of time. There are some things that we can. I think my battery just died on one of my microphones. That as we look at this, of unemployment, insufficient employment, that's kind of what you're talking about here. In there is, we can't pay people this amount or this or that. There's lots of going on here, but what do we do in the midst of that? Okay, it's something bigger than each and every, than us as an individual can handle. It's something bigger than what we can each do in our situation. But if we start to think about, okay, there's a lot going on here, but is there one area? Is there one thing that I could do? Is there one thing that we could do that might make a difference? Okay, so let's, we've spent the first 2 weeks here really thinking about just how big this is, and we've not actually even scratched the surface of that because of the overall connection we've mentioned that hunger can lead into a vicious spiral because of its effects. But the connections that food insecurity then brings to everything else, it decreases your ability to be employed. It decreases your health. The most food insecure counties in the United States are also the counties that have the highest obesity and diabetes and early, and lowest life expectancy counties. So it seems counterintuitive. No food, but you're obese.
Isn't that a poor choice of food?
No, it's because the only thing available is poor food.
Oh.
Or it's cheaper.
It's high processed food, and that's again goes back to the USDA. Oh, here you go. The cheapest foods available are the least nutritional foods possible, and lead all tremendous numbers of consequences. So in just a couple of minutes here, from what we've talked about, if somebody is hungry, how could they get out of that, or how could they find food? So what might be available to them to feed themselves or their families?
It's not sufficient, but we got the food banks,
So in our community here, and all kinds of there are public or food pantries, food banks. Yeah. What might keep a person from going to a food bank?
Look at where it is. How do you even get out to it? Out on Highway 51 if you don't have, that's the one I'm thinking of. If you don't have a car, how the heck did you get there?
Right, they rely on other people to take them.
Yep. What else
I
might keep
think
you from getting to the
pride.
food pantry?
Pride.
Pride. Pride is an interesting thing because pride comes from not the individual, but pride comes from social and cultural norms and expectations. But there's another, it's hard to get out there.
It's open while they are working.
It's open while if they are lucky enough to be employed, it's open while they might
We have a
have to be able to work.
clothing one in Eagle River every Wednesday from 9 to 3. And I keep asking, can you do one Saturday morning a month? Because of people that are working that still could use the help, just one Saturday a month even. Would be very helpful for the people that kind of fall in between.
Yeah.
That can't make a Wednesday because they're working.
Yeah. So there's a great program, our community and countless other communities, but there's obstacles to that. So could one thing that a person would try to remove those obstacles? Yeah. Wide varieties of ways of doing that.
Well, didn't they add hours to the food pantries?
Yes, there's a Thursday afternoon one now too.
Okay.
Donna said
I was
Ryan
just
Later
thinking-
added a taxi service?
No, there's just
Yeah.
individuals that are volunteering to
Oh,
pick
to pick
people
people
up
up.
and get them there.
Right.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, back when we had the COVID disaster, and they showed food being distributed, every one of these food exchange places had one premise: you better have a car.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you didn't have a car, there was no way to get, because if you saw the films, there were people loading people's SUVs with food. They didn't even ask if you needed it. But unless you've got a vehicle, you're pretty much out of luck getting to a food pantry.
So as we started our session, we all came here with a vehicle, right? Today. So why, look, here's a resource. And because of that, you fall into the wealthy category. Because the vast majority of human beings cannot afford an automobile. And I think many of us have, and I'm guilty of this, my cars are rusty, but I have multiple cars.
Meals on Wheels too.
Right. So that's
that's another way.
There's a resource we have. Are we making that available to bridge this?
There's another thing too, if you're so poor, you don't even know what the resources are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and to access them, I was just reading here, like the Access website,
Mhm.
and you have to have a computer, or you have to get to a library, or you have to even know how to use a computer, we help our relatives they have some issues, and I don't know how they would do it without having some knowledge or some help or Ted and I are relatively intelligent, and sometimes this stuff is hard.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, these days you pretty much have to have a smartphone to survive.
Right, and as soon as a
And
person
that's
does and they
big.
stand in line for a food pantry, everybody's judging them. Because I have a daughter that's a single mom now, and she gets but that's her whole internet connection. She doesn't have a computer at home, and that's how she's connected to her
Exactly.
kids, her school, and the internet is a smartphone. But the judging.
But
How
you pretty
dare
much-
they have a smartphone?
You pretty much need
Right.
that.
Yeah.
I know,
Right.
it's sad.
So yeah, even if you know one thing's available, there's so much you don't. I'll share a personal story. Our oldest son has cerebral palsy, and we didn't know how disabled he was until 3 weeks after his 18th birthday. Our son Cody, who we adopted, basically came with a social worker, and the social worker said, "Oh, Cody would qualify for this program. Why don't you contact this program and get Cody involved in that?" Because we were looking for resources. Well, they came to our house, the social worker, and taking the family history, and she said, "You have a son who has cerebral palsy?" and you know, I'm assuming you're on Katie Beckett Medicare. And we're like, what? Jonah, from the day he was born, should have been covered by Forward Health because of his level of disability. So he got, you know, 13 months of coverage. And again, I've got a master's degree. Anna is an advocate of advocates. She's a mama bear, and we have talked to Forward Health. We have tried to, but we couldn't access it because we didn't know it existed, and no one told us about it until, so the levels of barriers between programs, even for educated, food secure people, are so significant. Now you put in there food insecurity, and your ability to access and to do those things, to jump through the hoops, significantly decreases. So one of the things that I want you to do is take your handouts here, starting with number 7, here's the problem. There are a lot of great and wonderful things that are going on, that are out there, just like we said, in our community, like the Lakeland Pantry, and there's lots of other things going on in our communities that are there, that work, that help to address issues of food security and the things that go along with it. But then look at, on the back of handout 7, there's barriers to it. What are other barriers? What are things? We just came up with a handful of them. So take a look at handouts 7, 8, and 9. Think about these barriers, and just while thinking about them, what's something that could be done? Okay, thank you guys, and we are wrapping up on that. Again, also you included in there is another case study in your handouts. Take a look at case study number 2, and like I said, you might read this and say, especially by taking a look at the picture, and say, oh, that's something that's only going to happen in Milwaukee or Madison. This exact story takes place here. So read it and think about it. And of all the things here, do you wonder if in this case study, this person knows about the programs that are available that you just read about? Okay.